Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I never thought I'd end up working the graveyard shift at a storage facility, but life has a funny way of humbling you. It was March of 2019, and I was 24 years old, fresh off a layoff from a marketing firm in Portland, Oregon. My savings were running dry, rent was due, and when I saw the job listing for overnight security at Secure Space Storage on the edge of town, I didn't hesitate. The pay was surprisingly good, $16 an hour plus a night differential, and the job description made it sound simple enough. Monitor the cameras, do periodic walkthroughs, log any unusual activity. How hard could that be? My interview was with a man named Gerald Hutchins, the facility manager. He was in his late 50s with graying hair combed over a bald spot, wearing a polo shirt with the Secure Space logo embroidered on the chest. His office smelled like stale coffee and printer toner. We sat across from each other in uncomfortable plastic chairs while he flipped through my resume with the kind of disinterest that told me I was probably the only applicant. "You ever done security work before?" he asked without looking up. "Not officially," I said, "but I worked retail for 3 years during college. Loss prevention, customer service, that kind of thing," he grunted, still not making eye contact. "This is different. You're alone here from midnight to 8 in the morning. No customers, no co-workers, just you and 300 storage units spread across 5 buildings." He finally looked at me then, his watery blue eyes studying my face like he was trying to gauge something. "You comfortable being alone?" "Yeah, I'm good with that," I said, even though the way he phrased it gave me a weird feeling in my stomach. "I actually prefer working independently." Gerald nodded slowly, then pulled out a clipboard with a standard employment form attached. "Previous guard quit after 2 weeks. Didn't give a reason, just stopped showing up. The one before that lasted a month. I'm hoping you've got more staying power." I should have asked why they kept quitting. That would have been the smart thing to do, but I needed the job desperately, and my brain rationalized it as probably just boring work that made people quit. Nothing more sinister than that. I filled out the paperwork, passed a basic background check on the spot, and was told I could start the following Monday. My first night started with a 3-hour training session with Gerald, even though he seemed annoyed to be there after his regular hours. The facility was massive, bigger than it looked from the road. 5 large metal buildings painted industrial beige, each one 3 stories tall and about the length of a football field. The units ranged from small locker-sized spaces to massive garage-style bays that could fit an entire house worth of furniture. The whole property was surrounded by a 12-foot chain-link fence topped with barbed wire with a single entrance gate that locked automatically at 9 p.m. Gerald walked me through the security office, a cramped room in Building A that served as the facility's nerve center. One wall was covered with 12 monitors showing camera feeds from different angles around the property. The cameras were old, the kind that produced grainy black and white footage that made everything look vaguely ominous even in normal circumstances. A desk held an ancient computer, a logbook for recording incidents, and a radio that connected to the police dispatch if I ever needed emergency help. "Most nights nothing happens," Gerald said, gesturing vaguely at the monitors. "You watch the screens, you walk each building once per shift, you make sure the gate's locked, and you don't fall asleep. That's the job." "What kind of unusual activity should I be watching for?" I asked, pulling out a notebook to take notes. He shrugged. "Vandalism, theft attempts, people trying to climb the fence. We've had some homeless folks try to break in during winter to get out of the cold. Had a couple teenagers sneak in last summer to drink beer in one of the empty units. Just use common sense. Anything weird, you call the cops first, then call me." The way he said anything weird stuck with me, like he was leaving something unsaid. But he was already moving on, showing me how to use the master key card that opened every unit in case of emergency, where the breaker boxes were located, and which units had climate control that needed to be monitored. After the basic tour, he handed me a flashlight that felt surprisingly heavy and a can of pepper spray that he said was just in case. "In case of what?" I asked. "Dogs, maybe? Or raccoons? We've had issues with animals getting in somehow." He checked his watch. "I'm heading out. You've got my cell number if anything comes up. Don't call unless it's actually important." And just like that, he was gone. I heard his car start in the parking lot, then the sound of the engine fading as he drove away, leaving me completely alone in this massive facility at 12:30 in the morning. The first few hours weren't so bad. I sat in the security office, familiarizing myself with the camera angles, trying to memorize which monitor showed which part of the property. The cameras covered the main gate, the entrance to each building, several long corridors inside the buildings, and a few exterior shots of the parking areas. There were definitely blind spots, whole sections of the facility that weren't covered, but I figured that was normal for a budget operation like this. Around 2 a.m., I decided to do my first walkthrough of Building A, which was the largest and closest to the security office. The building had motion sensor lights that flickered on as I walked, creating this stuttering effect where I'd move from darkness into harsh fluorescent light and back into shadow. The corridors between the units were narrow, maybe 6 feet wide, with concrete floors and metal walls that echoed every footstep. Unit doors were various colors: orange, green, blue, yellow, corresponding to different sizes, and each one had a number stenciled on it in black paint. I walked slowly, shining my flashlight at the locks to make sure nothing looked tampered with. Most units had standard padlocks, but some had heavy-duty disc locks or even electronic keypads. I was about halfway through the first floor when I noticed something odd. Unit A147 had a lock on it, but there was also a separate deadbolt installed directly into the door frame, the kind you'd see on a residential front door. And beneath the number, someone had scratched something into the metal with what looked like a key or screwdriver. I leaned closer to read it. "Don't open." The letters were rough, uneven, carved with obvious effort into the thick paint and metal beneath. My first thought was that it was probably some teenage prank from back when Gerald mentioned kids breaking in. But something about the crude urgency of those words made my skin prickle. I checked my master keycard against the lock, but the deadbolt meant I couldn't open it even if I wanted to without a separate key. I made a note in my logbook about the graffiti and moved on, telling myself it was nothing. But for the rest of that first night, I couldn't stop thinking about that unit. Every time I looked at the bank of camera monitors, I'd find my eyes drifting to the feed that showed that particular corridor, halfway expecting to see something that wasn't there before. The week continued without incident. I fell into a routine pretty quickly. Arrive at 11:45, check in with the evening guard, a nice woman named Paula who worked 4 to midnight. Spend the first hour monitoring cameras and checking the log for any notes from the day shift. Do my walkthroughs at 2, 4, and 6 a.m. Use the time in between to read, browse my phone, or watch videos on my laptop. At 8, Gerald would arrive. I'd give him a brief rundown of the night, and then I'd drive home through morning traffic, sleep until 4 p.m., and repeat. The isolation didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. In fact, I kind of liked it. No demanding customers, no office politics, no pretending to be busy when the boss walked by. Just me, the hum of the building's HVAC system, and the occasional ping of metal expanding and contracting with the temperature changes. But on Friday night, my 5th shift, things started to feel different. I was doing my 2 a.m. walkthrough of Building B when I heard it, a sound coming from somewhere on the 3rd floor, a rhythmic banging like metal hitting metal. Thud, thud, thud. 3 times, then silence. Then 3 more times. I stopped walking, my hand instinctively going to the pepper spray on my belt. The sound had come from above me. I was on the 2nd floor, but I couldn't tell which unit. The acoustics in these metal buildings made everything echo weird, sounds bouncing off walls and ceilings until you couldn't pinpoint their origin. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, listening. Nothing. The building had returned to its normal ambient noise, the low hum of climate control, the distant buzz of fluorescent lights. I checked my watch. 2:14 a.m. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, moving slowly, trying to keep my footsteps quiet, even though I knew that was impossible on the metal grating that served as stairs. The 3rd floor of Building B was the smallest, just one long corridor with units on either side. The motion lights flickered on as I reached the top, and I walked the length of the hallway, checking locks, looking for any sign of disturbance. Everything appeared normal. All locks secure, no visible damage, no indication anyone had been up here. I was about to head back downstairs when I heard it again. Thud, thud, thud. This time I was certain it came from my left, from one of the units along the west wall. I walked back slowly, listening intently, trying to identify which specific door. The sound came again, and this time I pinpointed it. Unit B312. I approached the door carefully, my flashlight beam steady on the orange-painted metal. The lock looked fine, a standard padlock, nothing unusual. I pressed my ear against the door, feeling ridiculous even as I did it, like some character in a horror movie doing exactly what the audience knows they shouldn't do. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then I heard it, much closer this time because I was right against the door. The banging came from inside the unit, definitely inside, and it was the same pattern. 3 strikes. Pause. 3 strikes. My rational brain tried to explain it away. Maybe something had fallen and was swinging in the air, hitting the wall. Maybe a shelf had collapsed and things were settling. Maybe there was some kind of animal trapped in there, a raccoon like Gerald had mentioned, though how one would get into a locked storage unit I had no idea. I pulled out my radio and called Gerald, even though he'd told me not to unless it was important. After 6 rings, he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "This better be good," he said. "Sorry to wake you. I'm hearing noises coming from inside one of the units. B32. Sounds like something banging against the wall." There was a long pause. I heard him moving around, probably sitting up in bed. "What kind of noises?" "Metal on metal. 3 hits, then a pause, then 3 more." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, more alert but also strained. "What did you say the unit number was?" "B312, 3rd floor, west side." "Jesus Christ," he muttered so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Then louder, "Don't open it. Do not open that unit. Do you understand me?" His tone sent a chill down my spine. "Yeah, I understand, but what's in there?" "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Go back to the security office and wait for me." He hung up before I could ask anything else. I stood there in that corridor for another moment, staring at the orange door of Unit B312. The banging had stopped. Everything was quiet again. I backed away slowly, not turning my back on the door until I reached the stairs, which I realize sounds insane, but something about Gerald's reaction had genuinely spooked me. Back in the security office, I pulled up the camera feed for the 3rd floor of Building B. The angle didn't show the door of B312 directly, but I could see the corridor approaching it. Nothing moved. The hallway was empty, just harsh light and long shadows. I pulled out the facility's computer and accessed the tenant database, something Gerald had shown me how to do for emergencies. I searched for Unit B312. According to the system, it was rented to someone named M. Strauss, with a rental date going back 7 years. The monthly fee was paid automatically by credit card, always on time, never late. There was no phone number listed, just an email address that was obviously fake. Just a string of random numbers and letters. The emergency contact field was blank. 23 minutes later, I saw Gerald's truck pull into the parking lot on one of the exterior cameras. He moved fast for a man his age, practically jogging from his vehicle to the security office. When he burst through the door, I could see he'd thrown on clothes in a hurry. His shirt was untucked, and he was wearing house slippers instead of shoes. "Show me the feed," he said without preamble. He pointed to the monitor showing the 3rd floor corridor. We both stared at it for a moment. Nothing moved. "Did it stop?" he asked. "Yeah, right after I called you. What's going on, Gerald? What's in that unit?" He pulled up a chair and sat down heavily, rubbing his face with both hands. He looked older suddenly, tired in a way that went beyond just being woken up in the middle of the night. "How much do you want to keep this job?" The question threw me off. "I mean, I need the money. Why?" "Because if you want to stay, you need to understand something. There are units in this facility that you don't ask questions about. You don't try to open them. You don't go near them if you don't have to, and you definitely don't call me about them unless there's fire or flood." "That's insane. What if someone's in danger? What if there's illegal activity?" Gerald laughed, but it was bitter. You think I haven't asked myself that same question? I've managed this place for 12 years. These units, and there are 4 of them total, they've been here since before I started. The owners of the facility, some investment group based out of Chicago that I've never even met in person, they specifically instructed me to leave them alone. The rent gets paid, the lock stays secure, and we pretend they don't exist. That's not legal. There have to be regulations. Legal? He shook his head. Kid, I've got 3 years until I can retire with full benefits. My wife has medical bills that would bury us without my insurance. I need this job, which means I follow the rules I'm given even when they don't make sense. If you're smart, you'll do the same. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist on doing the right thing, whatever that was. But I thought about my own bank account, the rent that was due in 2 weeks, the job market that had been brutal enough to land me here in the first place. What are the other 3 units? He hesitated, then pulled out a small notebook from his back pocket. A147, B3112, C28 high-end, and D156. Memorize those numbers. If you hear anything from them, see anything unusual on the cameras, you ignore it unless it's an absolute emergency. And I mean fire, flood, or someone actively breaking in. A147, I said. That's the one with "Don't Open" scratched into the door. Gerald nodded. Previous security guard did that, the one who quit after 2 weeks. Kid convinced himself something was wrong with that unit, spent half a shift trying to get it open. Whatever he heard or saw in there, it scared him bad enough that he carved that warning and never came back. I had to hire a locksmith to change the lock because he damaged it trying to force it. And you don't think that's a red flag? That maybe we should call the police? The police have been here. 3 years ago, some tenant reported a weird smell coming from one of the buildings. 2 officers searched the whole property, including those 4 units. The investment group somehow produced keys, let the cops search everything. They didn't find anything illegal. No drugs, no weapons, no bodies, just regular storage stuff, furniture, boxes, old clothes. Whatever weirdness goes on here, it's apparently not illegal, just unexplained. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the quiet hum of the security equipment. Finally, Gerald stood up. Go home, get some sleep. Think about whether you want to keep this job. If you decide you don't, I understand. I'll have your last paycheck ready by Monday. And if I stay, then you follow the rules. You do your job. You ignore those 4 units and you collect your paycheck. Plenty of guards have made it work. You just have to accept that some things aren't your problem to solve. I drove home as the sun was rising, turning the eastern sky shades of orange and pink. My apartment was stuffy and smelled like the garbage I'd forgotten to take out before my shift. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to decide what to do. The rational part of my brain said to quit, to find some other job, any other job, even if it paid less. But the rational part of my brain wasn't the part that paid my rent or bought my groceries. I slept fitfully until late afternoon, waking up multiple times from dreams I couldn't quite remember, but that left me feeling unsettled. When my alarm finally went off at 4 p.m., I made my decision. I needed the money, and Gerald's explanation, as frustrating as it was, made sense from a practical standpoint. Plenty of facilities had units with delinquent renters, abandoned storage spaces, weird situations. I could just treat those 4 units like they were none of my business and focus on the other 296. I texted Gerald that I'd be in for my shift, and he responded immediately with a simple, "Good." The next 2 weeks were uneventful, almost aggressively so, like the facility was trying to convince me there was nothing wrong. I did my rounds, monitored my cameras, logged my observations. I saw cats occasionally prowling the exterior, watched a opossum waddle across the parking lot one night, and dealt with exactly 0 actual security incidents. The job was boring in the best possible way. I avoided the 4 problem units as much as I could, but that was easier said than done when they were spread across different buildings. A147 was on my route every time I walked Building A. B312 required me to pass it to check the climate control panel on that floor. C209 was next to a breaker box I had to inspect. D-156 was located right by the main stairs of its building, but I didn't hear any more strange noises. The units looked the same every time I passed them, undisturbed, locked secure. I started to relax, started to think maybe that first week had been a fluke, or maybe my own paranoia making something out of nothing. Then came the night I met Michael. It was a Tuesday, my 16th shift, and I was doing my 4 a.m. walkthrough of Building C. I'd just checked the second floor units and was heading up to the third when I heard footsteps on the floor above me. Not heavy footsteps, but definitely human, the distinct sound of shoes on concrete. I stopped mid-step, listening. The footsteps continued, casual and unhurried, walking down the corridor directly above my head. My first thought was that someone had been locked in accidentally, maybe a tenant who'd lost track of time. But that didn't make sense. The facility had been closed and locked since 9 p.m., 7 hours ago. I pulled out my radio to call Gerald, then remembered his instruction. This wasn't one of the 4 problem units. This was just someone where they shouldn't be. Standard security stuff. I could handle this myself. Hello? I called up the stairwell. This is security. The facility is closed. You need to identify yourself. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then a voice called back. Male, youngish, friendly even. Oh man, sorry. I didn't realize how late it was. I'm a tenant, Unit C308. I'll be right down. I heard the footsteps again, this time approaching the stairs. A moment later, a man appeared on the landing above me. He looked to be in his early 30s, wearing jeans and a faded red t-shirt with dark hair that needed a cut and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He gave me an apologetic smile as he descended the stairs. Seriously, my bad, he said, extending his hand when he reached my level. I'm Michael Strauss. I was reorganizing my unit and completely lost track of time. The hours just got away from me. You know how it is. I shook his hand automatically. My brain's still processing. The facility locks at 9. How did you get in? Oh, I was already inside before closing. I come in around 7 sometimes when it's quiet. Less crowded, you know? I guess I should have mentioned to the evening guard that I'd be here late. It made sense, technically. Tenants did sometimes work in their units after hours if they were already inside before the gate locked. It wasn't common, but it wasn't unheard of. Paula, the evening guard, probably saw him enter and forgot to mention it in the logbook. Okay, well, you can't stay. I need to escort you out. Of course, absolutely. Just let me grab my stuff from my unit and I'll be right behind you. He started to turn back toward the stairs, and that's when my brain caught up with what he'd said. Michael Strauss. Strauss was the name on the rental agreement for Unit B312, the problem unit in Building B. But he'd said his unit was C308. Wait, I said, and he stopped, turning back with his eyebrows raised questioningly. You said your unit is C308? That's right. But we're in Building C. You don't need to go back upstairs. C308 is on the 3rd floor, back the way you came. He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. Right. Sorry, I meant I left my water bottle up there. Just take a second. Something felt wrong. The way he'd hesitated, the way his story had just shifted slightly. And that name, Strauss, the same as the mystery renter of B312. Tell you what, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. I'll walk up with you. I need to finish my rounds anyway. That's really not necessary. I know you're busy. It's literally my job. Come on. I started up the stairs and he had no choice but to follow. We walked in silence to the 3rd floor and I made a point of leading him directly to Unit C308. This one, right? He nodded, but he was looking at me differently now, sizing me up. He didn't pull out a key, didn't make any move to open the unit. Instead, he said, You know what? I think I left it in my car, actually. Let's just head out. Let's check the unit first. Make sure you're not forgetting anything else. I don't have my key with me. That's convenient, because C308 isn't your unit, is it, Mr. Strauss? His friendly demeanor dropped completely. His face hardened, and when he spoke again, his voice was colder. You really should mind your own business. You're trespassing in a facility I'm supposed to be securing. That makes it my business. We stood there facing each other in that corridor, and I realized I might have made a serious mistake confronting him alone. He was bigger than me. and we were on the third floor of an empty building in the middle of the night, with the nearest person being Gerald, who was asleep at home miles away. Michael must have seen the calculation on my face because he smiled again, and this time it was predatory. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to forget you saw me tonight. You're going to go back to your little office, finish your shift, and never mention this to anyone, because if you don't, I know where you live. You don't know anything about me. I know your name is Tyler Brennan. I know you drive a gray 2012 Toyota Corolla, license plate KJB4798. I know you live in the Riverside Apartments on Monroe Street, Unit 314. And I know you work here alone 5 nights a week with no backup and no weapon except pepper spray that's probably never been tested. Every word felt like a punch to my gut. He'd been watching me, had probably been watching every night guard for years. He knew our routines, our habits, our vulnerabilities. Now, he continued, I'm going to walk out of here, and you're going to let me, and we're both going to pretend this never happened. Yes? I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. He patted me on the shoulder like we were old friends, then walked past me toward the stairs. I watched him go, my hands shaking, my mind racing through options. Call the police, call Gerald, run, fight, anything except just standing there like a coward. But I did stand there. I listened to his footsteps descend the stairs, heard the metal door of Building C open and close, and then I was alone again in that fluorescent-lit corridor, feeling like I was going to throw up. I went back to the security office and immediately pulled up the exterior cameras. I watched Michael cross the parking lot to a dark blue sedan parked in the visitor section. He got in, sat there for a moment, then drove to the gate. Since it was locked from the outside but opened automatically from the inside, he just drove through, and the gate closed behind him. I should have called the police right then, but what would I tell them? A guy was in the storage facility after hours? That wasn't necessarily a crime if he was a tenant. He'd threatened me, sure, but it would be my word against his, and he'd been smart enough not to make any specific threats I could prove. And the stuff he knew about me, that wasn't illegal either, just creepy. I logged the incident in my notebook, but not in the official logbook. I told myself I'd figure out what to do about it later, after my shift, when I was thinking more clearly. But really, I was scared. This wasn't like the weird noises or the mysterious units. This was a person who knew where I lived, who'd been watching me, who had access to this facility and God knows what else. The rest of my shift crawled by. Every shadow looked like a person. Every sound made me jump. When Gerald arrived at 8 a.m., I considered telling him everything but chickened out at the last minute. I gave him my standard report, nothing to note, quiet night, and went home. I didn't sleep. I sat in my apartment with all the doors locked and the curtains closed, researching Michael Strauss online. I found dozens of people with that name, but none of them seemed to match the man I'd met. No local profiles, no social media, nothing. It was like he didn't exist outside of that storage facility. Over the next few days, I became paranoid. I started noticing cars that seemed to follow me. I took different routes home. I looked over my shoulder constantly. Every time my phone rang, I expected it to be him. Every knock on my door made my heart race. But nothing happened. No more encounters, no threats, no follow-up. By the end of the week, I started to convince myself that maybe he'd meant what he said. As long as I kept quiet, he'd leave me alone. I was wrong. On Saturday night, 3 weeks after my encounter with Michael, I arrived for my shift to find Paula, the evening guard, waiting for me in the parking lot instead of inside the office. She was pacing back and forth next to her car, and when she saw me pull in, she practically ran over. "Thank God," she said. "I've been waiting for you." Paula was usually calm and collected, a woman in her 50s who'd been doing security work for years. But right now she looked rattled, her face pale under the parking lot lights. "What's wrong?" I asked, getting out of my car. "I need you to check something with me before I leave. I don't want to go in there alone." "Check what?" "Just come on." She led me into Building D, moving quickly, her flashlight beam bouncing as she walked. I followed her up to the second floor, and she stopped in front of Unit D156. One of the 4 problem units. "The lock's different," she said, shining her light on the door. She was right. The last time I'd passed this unit 2 nights ago, It had a heavy-duty disc lock, the kind that's almost impossible to cut. Now it had a standard padlock, the cheap kind you could buy at any hardware store. "When did you notice this?" I asked. "About an hour ago during my last rounds. I checked the other 3 units. A147 and B312 still have their original locks, but C209 has a different one too, also just a standard padlock." My stomach dropped. "Did you tell Gerald?" I called him. He said not to touch them. He'd deal with it on Monday. "Monday? Someone's been tampering with these units and he wants to wait until Monday?" Paula shrugged helplessly. "I'm just telling you what he said." "But I don't feel right leaving without someone else knowing. What if whoever changed these locks comes back tonight?" After she left, I went back to the security office and pulled up the camera feeds, rewinding through the last 24 hours of footage. The cameras had blind spots, but I should be able to see anyone entering or leaving the buildings. I watched at double speed, looking for any movement. At 3:47 a.m. the previous night, during the shift of the other overnight guard, a guy named Marcus who worked my nights off, I saw it. A figure appeared in Building D, walking down the second-floor corridor. The camera angle didn't show their face, just their back, but I could see they were wearing a dark jacket and carried what looked like a duffel bag. They stopped at Unit D156, spent about 3 minutes doing something to the lock, then moved on down the corridor. I switched to the camera covering the stairs and caught them again, this time heading up to the 3rd floor. I lost them for a while due to blind spots, but picked them up again in Building C, doing the same thing at Unit C209. Then they disappeared, exiting Building C and staying out of camera range as they left the facility. I grabbed my phone and called Marcus. He answered on the 5th ring, groggy with sleep. "This better be important," he said, echoing Gerald's usual greeting. "Did you see anyone in the buildings during your shift last night, around 4 a.m.? "No, why?" "Someone changed the locks on 2 of the units. I've got them on camera." There was a long pause. "The special units?" So Marcus knew about them too. "Yeah, D156 and C209. "Jesus, did you call Gerald?" "Paula already did. He said he'd deal with it Monday." "Then that's what you do. Don't get involved, Tyler. Whatever's going on with those units, it's above our pay grade. Someone's breaking into them, or maybe breaking out. How's that not our problem?" "Because Gerald said so. Look, I need this job. You need this job. We do what we're told and we don't ask questions. That's the deal." He hung up. I sat there staring at the monitors, feeling a familiar frustration. Everyone wanted to pretend nothing was wrong, to just collect their paychecks and go home. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was happening, something I was supposed to prevent. I decided to do my rounds early, starting with Building D. When I reached Unit D156, I stood there for a long moment, staring at that cheap padlock. With the master keycard and a pair of bolt cutters I'd seen in the maintenance closet, I could get into this unit right now. I could finally see what everyone was so desperate to keep hidden. The smart thing would be to walk away, follow the rules, mind my own business. I went and got the bolt cutters. The padlock snapped easily, much easier than I expected, the metal shearing with a sharp crack that echoed down the corridor. I stood there for a moment with the broken lock in my hand, my heart hammering in my chest, fully aware I was probably getting fired for this. The unit's rolling door had no handle on the outside, but there was a gap at the bottom just wide enough to get my fingers under. I lifted, and the door rolled up with a rusty squeal. My flashlight beam cut into the darkness inside, and for a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The unit was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no boxes, nothing. Just bare metal walls and a concrete floor. But that's not what made me freeze. The walls were covered in writing, floor to ceiling, every surface, dense handwritten text in black marker. I stepped inside slowly, panning my flashlight across the walls. It was all the same message, repeated thousands of times in various sizes and scripts. "Don't let them out, don't let them out, don't let them out, don't let them out." The text was manic, overlapping, some of it barely legible where the writer had traced the same words again and again until the marker had bled through. My hands started shaking. This wasn't just weird. This was evidence of someone having a complete psychological breakdown inside this unit. I backed out quickly, letting the door roll shut, and immediately called Gerald. I didn't care what time it was or that he'd told me not to call. This was beyond strange noises or suspicious tenants. This was something that needed immediate attention. He answered after 2 rings, alert this time. "Tyler, what's wrong?" I opened D156. Silence, long enough that I checked my phone to make sure we were still connected. "Why the hell would you do that?" His voice was cold. "Because someone changed the locks and I needed to know what was inside. Gerald, the walls, they're covered in writing. Someone was warning about something. Don't let them out, over and over again. Close it back up right now. There's nothing in here to let out, it's empty." I said, "Close it back up." He was shouting now, genuinely angry. "I'm on my way. Don't open any other units. Don't do anything else. Just wait for me in the security office." He hung up. I stood there in that corridor, still holding the broken padlock, wondering what I'd just gotten myself into. I didn't wait in the security office like he'd told me to. Instead, I went directly to Building C, to Unit C209. If someone had changed these locks for a reason, I needed to know what was inside both units before Gerald arrived and potentially covered everything up. C209's padlock broke just as easily. I rolled the door up, my flashlight ready, expecting to find another empty room covered in warnings. Instead, I found someone living there. The unit had been converted into a makeshift apartment. A sleeping bag lay on an air mattress in one corner. A camping stove sat on a folding table next to a cooler. Clothes hung from a rope strung across the space. Water bottles were stacked against one wall, dozens of them. And everywhere, scattered on every surface, were newspapers, printed articles, and photographs, all thumbtacked to the walls or lying in organized piles. I stepped inside, my light moving over the papers. They were all news stories, dating back years, about disappearances, missing persons from all over Oregon and Washington. Some were old clippings from the 70s and 80s, yellowed and brittle. Others were recent printouts from online news sites. My light fell on a particular cluster of articles, and my blood went cold. They were all from Portland, all from the last 5 years. 7 different people, ranging from teenagers to adults in their 50s, all reported missing. All last seen within a 10-mile radius of this storage facility. Beneath those articles was a map of the local area with red pins marking locations. I recognized the intersection where this facility sat, marked with a black X. Other pins radiated outward, dozens of them, forming a pattern I couldn't quite understand. A bulletin board leaned against the back wall, covered in photographs. Some showed the exterior of this building from different angles and times of day. Others showed people, surveillance-style photos of them walking, getting into cars, going about their daily lives. I recognized Paula in one photo, leaving the facility at the end of her shift. Marcus was in another, getting out of his truck. And there I was. Multiple photos of me, arriving for work, leaving after my shift, walking into my apartment building, sitting in my car at a red light. Someone had been watching all of us, documenting our movements. On the table, beneath a stack of papers, I found a notebook. I flipped it open to the most recent entry, dated 3 days ago. Changed access to 2 units. Need to verify contents before final action. Security guards are still blind to the pattern. M confirmed operation proceeds. Timeline moves up to next dark moon. Cleansing must happen before they become aware. I heard a sound behind me and spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Michael Strauss stood in the doorway. "I warned you to mind your own business," he said quietly. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since our first encounter. He looked tired, thin, like he hadn't been sleeping or eating properly. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes hung loose on his frame. In his hand, he held a small knife, the kind you might use for camping. "What is all this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who are you?" "Someone trying to stop something terrible from happening." He stepped into the unit, and I instinctively backed up, bumping into the table. "Someone who's been trying to warn you people for weeks, but nobody listens. These articles, the photos, you've been stalking us. I've been watching. There's a difference. I needed to know if any of you were part of it." He gestured at the walls with his free hand. "Did you open D156? I nodded. "Then you saw the warning. Don't let them out. That's what this whole thing is about. Those units, the 4 special ones. They're not storing furniture or old clothes. They're containing something that should never be released. That's insane. The police searched them. There was nothing illegal. The police saw what they were allowed to see. He moved closer and I gripped my flashlight tighter, knowing it was my only weapon. 3 years ago, I worked here. Night security, just like you. I started noticing patterns. People coming and going at odd hours. Always the same 4 units. Always the same people, though they used different names. I started investigating on my own time, tracking them, documenting everything. He pointed at the map with his knife. Every red pin is someone who disappeared within a month of being photographed near this facility. Not tenants, random people. People who had nothing to do with this place officially, but who somehow ended up here on camera, usually in the background of other footage. And then they were gone. That doesn't mean anything. Correlation isn't causation. I thought the same thing at first, but then I found the bodies. The room seemed to tilt. What? Not here. They wouldn't be that stupid. But I tracked one of the regular visitors to a property 60 miles north. Followed him there, watched him bury something in the woods on his land. Waited until he left, then dug it up. His face had gone pale, and his hand holding the knife was shaking. It was a young woman, maybe 25. She'd been reported missing from Portland 3 weeks earlier. I found her license in her pocket. Her name was Rebecca Chen. I'd seen that name. One of the articles on his wall was about her. Why didn't you go to the police? I did. I led them right to her body. They arrested the property owner, a man named Howard Vicks, but his lawyer got the evidence thrown out because I'd been trespassing on private property. The search was ruled illegal. Vicks walked, and Rebecca's body ended up listed as an unidentified Jane Doe because the police couldn't officially use her license as identification since it was obtained illegally. He gestured at the walls again. I started digging deeper. Vicks was connected to 4 other people, all of them with access to those special units. They rotate who comes here, who maintains the locks, who checks on whatever's inside. And they're very, very careful. No phones when they visit. Different cars, they vary their schedules. But they have to come eventually, because whatever's in those units requires maintenance. What do you think is in there? I don't know. I've never been able to get inside A147 or B312. They have locks I can't break and alarms I can't see. I tried once, 2 years ago when I was still working here. The alarm was silent, but the owners knew within hours. That's when I got fired. You've been living here ever since, in this unit? I rented it under a fake name using a prepaid card. I needed a place to store my research and somewhere I could access the facility after hours. I watched Marcus and Paula for months before I was sure they weren't involved. And I've been watching you. The 3 weeks you've been here, did you notice anything different? Any changes to the facility, new equipment, renovations? I thought back. No, everything's been the same. That's because they're preparing. The locks I changed on D15TX and C209, those weren't security upgrades. They were downgrades, making it easier to access quickly. Something's going to happen soon, Tyler. Something bad. And everyone who works here is either going to be part of it or in the way. Before I could respond, my radio crackled to life. Gerald's voice, tight with anger. Tyler, where the hell are you? I told you to wait in the office. I looked at Michael. He was staring at me intently, clearly trying to figure out what I'd do next. If I responded to Gerald, told him where I was, Michael would run or worse, try to stop me from talking. If I didn't respond, Gerald would come looking for me, and I was currently locked in a storage unit with someone who'd just admitted to multiple felonies. I need to answer that, I said carefully. He's one of them, Michael said. Gerald. He's been here 12 years, right? He's been managing this facility and those 4 units the entire time. You think that's a coincidence? He told me he follows orders from the owners. The owners are the ones doing this, and Gerald's been their loyal employee, hiring people stupid enough or desperate enough to ignore what's happening right under their noses. He looked at the radio on my belt. If you answer that, if you tell him where you are, we're both dead. You don't know that. I know Howard Vicks walked free after burying a body. I know 7 other people have disappeared from this area in patterns that center on this facility. I know the police won't help because they searched those units already and found nothing, And I know that you opened D156 and saw that warning, which means you understand, somewhere in your gut, that I'm telling you the truth. My radio crackled again. Tyler, respond, now. Michael raised his knife, not threatening me with it, but holding it ready. Make your choice. I grabbed my radio. I'm here. I'm in Building C, checking the units like you told me to. Gerald's response was immediate. Building C? I told you to wait in the office. I know, but I thought I should secure C209 after opening D156. The lock was changed on this one too. A pause. Then, stay there. I'm coming to you. Michael was already moving, grabbing a backpack from under the table and shoving his notebook inside. We have maybe 2 minutes before he gets here. Probably less if he's already in the parking lot. What are you doing? Getting evidence before he destroys it. You should do the same. He started pulling photographs off the walls, not carefully, just tearing them down and stuffing them into his bag. If you want to stop this, you need proof of what's in those other units, the ones I couldn't open. I'm not breaking into anything else. I could go to jail for what I've already done. He stopped and looked at me, and I saw genuine fear in his eyes. You're going to jail or worse if you stay here. Gerald isn't coming to write you up for a policy violation. He's coming to make sure you don't talk about what you've seen. You're paranoid. Yeah, I am, but that doesn't mean I'm wrong. He zipped up his backpack and moved toward the door, then stopped. They use these facilities, places like this all over the Pacific Northwest. Storage units, cheap and anonymous. They keep their operations spread out, compartmentalized, so no one sees the whole pattern. But it all comes back to harvesting. Harvesting what? People. Or parts of people. I'm not entirely sure. But whatever they're doing, they've been doing it for decades, and they've gotten very good at not getting caught. He stepped out of the unit into the corridor. Last chance. Come with me, or stay and trust Gerald. I should have stayed. I should have waited for Gerald, explained what I'd found, and let the proper authorities handle it. But Michael was right about one thing. I'd seen that warning in D156, seen the desperation in those thousands of repeated words, and some part of me knew this went beyond a simple security job. I followed him out of the unit, and we ran. We made it down the stairs and out of Building C, and Michael led me not toward the parking lot, but around the back of the facility, toward the fence line. My car was in the front lot, but his sedan was apparently parked on the street beyond the property, in a spot where it wouldn't show up on cameras. There's a gap in the fence here, he said, leading me to a section where the chain link had been cut and bent back, creating an opening just wide enough to squeeze through. I made it months ago, easier than trying to explain to the evening guards why I needed to leave after the gate locked. We pushed through the gap and emerged on a side street lined with industrial buildings and empty lots. Michael's sedan was parked half a block down, covered in a layer of dust that suggested it had been sitting there for days. Get in, he said, unlocking it. I'm not going anywhere with you. This is insane. I'm calling the police. And telling them what? That your manager might be involved in a conspiracy you have no evidence for? That I've been living illegally in a storage unit and showed you some news articles? They'll arrest me and send you home. You said you found a body. You talked to the police before. And it went nowhere. I need more than one body and a bunch of missing persons reports. I need access to those other units, the ones that matter. And now that Gerald knows someone's been tampering with the locks, he's going to move everything. Tonight, probably. If we don't document what's in A147 and B3-112 before that happens, we'll never get another chance. I looked back at the facility. I could see the security office lights from here, and Gerald's truck was indeed in the parking lot. He was inside, probably looking at the camera footage, seeing me in Building C with Michael. My car's here, I said. My job's here. I can't just run away. Your car's registered to your apartment address, which they already know, and your job is over. You broke into a secured unit. You're fired at minimum, possibly arrested if Gerald wants to press charges. The only question is whether you're going to get something useful out of all this. He was right. Everything I'd built in the last 4 weeks, my steady income, my routine, my path back to financial stability, it was gone. I could walk back into that facility, try to explain myself to Gerald, and probably end up exactly where Michael said, fired and possibly charged with criminal trespass and vandalism, Or I could follow this paranoid, possibly unhinged man and see if there was any truth to his conspiracy theories. I got in the car. Michael drove us to a diner about 10 miles away, one of those 24-hour places that caters to truckers and insomniacs. We sat in a corner booth and he ordered coffee while spreading out his documents on the table between us. "Show me everything," I said. "All your evidence, all your research. Because if this is just speculation and paranoia, I'm walking out and calling the cops on you." For the next 2 hours, he walked me through it all. The disappearances, the patterns, the connection between the facility's ownership and several other properties across Oregon and Washington. He had rental agreements showing that the same corporate entity, Northwest Holdings LLC, owned or managed at least a dozen other storage facilities. He had photos and descriptions of 5 different people who regularly visited these facilities, always checking on specific units, always avoiding cameras as much as possible. He showed me news articles about Howard Vicks, the man he'd tracked to the buried body. Vicks had been arrested but released. His lawyer had argued successfully that the evidence was tainted. But what Michael pointed out was that Vicks owned a property management company that had contracts with Northwest Holdings. He was directly connected to the facility where I worked. "What about the other 4 people?" I asked, looking at photos of people I didn't recognize. "Have you connected them to disappearances?" "Not directly. That's the problem. They're careful, too careful. The actual kidnappings or murders, if that's what they are, happen somewhere else. The facility is just a storage point, a way station maybe. Whatever they're doing with the bodies or the victims, it requires these units for some part of the process. That's a huge leap. You're assuming they're killing people based on coincidental disappearances." Coincidental? He pulled out the map again, the one with all the red pins. "Look at the pattern. Every single disappearance, 37 of them over the last decade, happened within a 50-mile radius of one of these facilities, and the timing matters too. They cluster around new moons when the nights are darkest. 3 or 4 disappearances a year, spread out enough that they don't look connected, random enough that each one gets investigated separately." I studied the map. He was right about the pattern, though I wasn't sure it proved anything beyond confirmation bias. If you looked hard enough for patterns, you could find them anywhere. "Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say there's some kind of organized operation using these storage facilities. What's in the units? Why do they need them?" "That's what we need to find out. D-156 was clearly used by a previous victim or someone who knew about the operation. They left that warning, 'Don't let them out.' So whatever's in the other units, someone thought it was dangerous enough to warn people. Unless it's just graffiti from a crazy person, which, no offense, is what everyone's going to think about your theories too." Michael leaned back, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely uncertain. "I know how this sounds. I know I seem paranoid. Maybe I am paranoid. But I saw that body, Tyler. Rebecca Chen was real. She had a family who's still looking for her. And I found her in the ground because I followed someone from that storage facility. So why not just watch the facility and wait for them to make a mistake, follow them again, document everything legally this time, and build a real case? Because they know I'm watching now. They've known for years. That's why they fired me. That's why they're moving their operation. Tonight, I guarantee you, they're emptying those units, relocating whatever's inside, and I'll never find them again." He gathered up his papers. "I need to get into those units in the next few hours before dawn. That means going back to the facility." "That's suicide. Gerald's going to be there. He's probably already called the owners. They could have people coming. Gerald leaves at 9 a.m. when the day shift starts. After that, it's just regular staff who don't know about the special units. If we can get back in after Gerald leaves, we'll have a small window. The day shift will see us. Not if we're careful. I've done this before. There are blind spots in the camera coverage, and the day staff usually stays in the office unless a customer needs something." He looked at me. "I know I'm asking a lot. You don't know me. You have no reason to trust me. But you opened D-156. You saw that warning. And you followed me out here instead of staying with Gerald. Some part of you knows something is wrong." He was right about that. But knowing something was wrong and breaking into storage units in broad daylight were very different things. If I do this, if I help you, what happens after? Even if we find something, we're both guilty of multiple crimes. If we find something real, something that proves people are being hurt, the crimes won't matter. We turn everything over to the police, the FBI, whoever will listen. We become witnesses instead of criminals. And if we don't find anything, then I'm crazy. You made a mistake getting involved with me, and we both need to figure out what to do with the rest of our lives. I drank my cold coffee and looked out the diner window at the gradually lightening sky. Sunrise was maybe an hour away. In a few hours, I should have been home in my apartment, sleeping after a normal boring shift. Instead, I was sitting in a diner with a conspiracy theorist, planning to break into the workplace that had just fired me. "Tell me about the notebook," I said finally. "The one in your unit. You wrote about a timeline, a cleansing, something about a dark moon." I found that phrase in some old documents related to Northwest Holdings. It's buried in internal memos from the 90s that I pulled from public records. They mentioned scheduled cleansings that correlated with lunar phases. I think it means they're disposing of evidence, maybe bodies at specific times. The next dark moon is when? He pulled out his phone and checked. Tonight, or technically this morning, since it's already past midnight. The new moon is at 4 a.m. So if you're right, they're moving everything now, while we're sitting here. Probably. But if we go back now, while Gerald's still there, we're just going to get arrested or worse. We need to wait until the shift change. We sat in that diner until 8:30 a.m., drinking bad coffee and watching the clock. Michael dozed fitfully in his seat, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those articles, about Rebecca Chen and the other missing people. I thought about that warning scrawled on the walls of D-156, and I thought about my conversation with Gerald, about how everyone just followed orders and ignored what was happening. At 8:45, we drove back toward the facility. Michael parked on a different side street, several blocks away this time. We walked to the fence line and approached the gap he'd cut, moving carefully through the overgrown weeds and trash that accumulated in this industrial area. From our vantage point, we could see the parking lot. Gerald's truck was still there, as expected, but there were also two other vehicles I didn't recognize. A white van with no windows and a black SUV with tinted glass. "It's not good," Michael whispered. "Maybe they're just customers." At 9 a.m. on a Sunday, customers don't park right in front of the security office. We watched. At 9:05, Gerald came out of Building A, but he wasn't alone. Two men walked with him, both wearing dark jackets despite the warming morning air. They stopped by the white van, talking in a group, too far away for us to hear what they were saying. Michael pulled out a small pair of binoculars from his backpack and looked through them. The taller guy is Howard Vicks, the one who buried Rebecca. "Are you sure?" "I spent 3 months following him." "I'm sure. We should call the police right now." "And tell them what?" "That a man who was already investigated and released is standing in a parking lot? They'll tell us to stop harassing him, or they'll arrest us for making false reports." Michael lowered the binoculars. "We need to get inside those units." "This is insane." But I didn't leave. I stayed crouched in those weeds next to him, watching as Gerald and the two men went back into Building A. They were inside for maybe 20 minutes, then came out again, this time carrying something between them. It looked like a large plastic container, the kind you might store holiday decorations in, except this one was clearly heavy, requiring both men to carry it together. They loaded it into the back of the van. Then they went back inside and brought out another one, and another. Over the next hour, they made 6 trips loading containers from Building A, then moving to Building B and doing the same thing. "They're emptying the units," Michael said, "right now in broad daylight. They're not even trying to hide it. Because they think no one's watching. Everyone who works here was told not to ask questions. We need to see what's in those containers." "How?" "They're surrounded by cameras and there are 3 of them." Michael was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "We need a distraction, something that pulls them away from the buildings long enough for us to get inside." "Like what?" He reached into his backpack and pulled out a road flare, the kind you keep in your car for emergencies. "Like a fire." "Absolutely not. We are not committing arson." Not inside the facility. Out here. He gestured at the overgrown lot around us. This dry grass will go up fast. Smoke will be visible from the facility. They'll have to respond, either to investigate or to make sure it doesn't spread to the fence. And then what? We still can't get past the gate. We use the gap in the fence. We go in through the back while they're distracted at the front. We get into the units they haven't emptied yet, document whatever's inside, and get out. With our phones as evidence, it's better than nothing. I looked at the facility, at the white van being systematically loaded with containers whose contents I could only imagine. I thought about those news articles, those missing people, those families still looking for answers. If we do this, I said slowly, we're crossing a line we can't come back from. We crossed that line when you opened D-156. Everything after that is just a question of whether we follow through. He was right. I'd already committed breaking and entering, already violated the trust of my employer, already allied myself with someone the facility owners clearly considered a threat. Going back now, trying to claim innocence or ignorance, that ship had sailed. Okay, I said, but we need rules. No violence, no confrontation. If they see us, we run. And the second we have something concrete, we go to the authorities. Agreed? Agreed. Michael moved carefully through the weeds to a spot about 50 yards from the fence where the grass was thickest and driest. He took out the road flare, looked at me one more time to make sure I was committed, then struck it. The flare burst into bright red flame, and he tossed it into the grass. The dry vegetation caught immediately, flames spreading faster than I'd expected. Within seconds, a decent-sized fire was burning, smoke billowing up into the morning sky. We ran back to the fence gap and waited. It took about 3 minutes before we heard shouting from the facility. I peered through the fence and saw Gerald and the two men running toward the parking lot. They'd seen the smoke. Now, Michael said, and we squeezed through the gap in the fence. We stayed low, moving quickly around the perimeter of the property, using the buildings for cover. The fire was behind us, and I could hear sirens in the distance. Someone had already called it in. We had maybe 5 minutes before fire trucks arrived and the whole area became crowded with emergency responders. Michael led me to a side entrance of Building A that was out of view from the parking lot. He pulled out a lockpick set from his backpack and went to work on the door. It took him maybe 30 seconds, and we were inside. The interior of Building A felt different during the day. Sunlight came through high windows, creating dusty shafts of light. But it was still eerily quiet. No customers since it was Sunday morning. No staff since they were all presumably dealing with the fire. We ran to Unit A-147, the one with the warning scratched into the door. The lock was still the same, the heavy deadbolt that Michael said he couldn't pick. But the door itself looked different. The frame was slightly damaged, like someone had been working on it recently. "They've been in here," Michael said, "recently. Look at the scratches around the lock." He pulled out a small crowbar from his backpack, definitely had come prepared, and wedged it between the door and the frame. "Help me." We both pulled, putting our weight into it. The deadbolt held, but the door frame itself started to give. The metal was thick, but whoever installed this unit hadn't reinforced it properly. With one final heave, something cracked and the door popped open an inch. The smell hit us immediately. Chemical, sharp, like formaldehyde or industrial cleaner. Michael pulled his shirt up over his nose and pushed the door open wider. Inside was nothing like D-156. This unit was full, packed with metal shelving that ran floor to ceiling. And on those shelves were jars, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each one filled with clear liquid and something floating inside. "Oh God," I said, my stomach lurching. Michael stepped inside carefully, his phone out, taking pictures. I followed, though every instinct screamed at me to run. The jars were labeled with numbers and dates, going back years. Some contained what looked like tissue samples. Others held things I couldn't identify, organic matter preserved in fluid. But it was the far corner that made me actually gag. A larger container, not a jar but a sealed plastic bin, sat on the bottom shelf. Through the translucent sides, I could see what looked like a human hand. "They're collecting trophies," Michael said, his voice shaking. "Or evidence, or both." He moved along the shelves, photographing everything, being careful not to touch anything. I forced myself to do the same, documenting the labels, the dates, the horrible contents of each jar. Then we heard voices, close, in the building with us. We both froze. The voices were coming from the first floor, 2 people, maybe more, walking down the corridor toward the stairs, toward us. Out! Now! Michael grabbed my arm and we ran back to the door, pulling it closed behind us as quietly as we could. But the damaged frame wouldn't latch properly. It hung slightly open, obviously compromised. We ran for the side exit, but footsteps on the stairs behind us were faster. Someone shouted. We burst through the exterior door and sprinted toward Building B, knowing we couldn't make it back to the fence gap without being seen. The cameras, I gasped. They'll see us. Can't worry about that now. We ducked into Building B through a customer entrance that had been left propped open, probably by one of the day staff who was supposed to be working but had gone to investigate the fire. We could hear people behind us, in Building A, shouting to each other. Split up, Michael said. They can't chase us both. Get to B312, document it, and get out however you can. Michael, go! He ran toward the stairs leading up, deliberately making noise, drawing attention. I heard someone behind us shout and give chase. Michael had made himself the target. I ran the opposite direction toward the back of Building B, to where I knew Unit B312 was located. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. Behind me I could hear footsteps, shouting, the sounds of pursuit. B312's door looked undamaged. The lock was the original disc lock, but like the others, someone had been working on it. The mechanism looked scratched and weakened. I didn't have a crowbar or lockpicks, but I had adrenaline and rage and 4 weeks of frustration. I grabbed the door and pulled with everything I had, bracing my foot against the wall. The lock held, but I felt the door give slightly. I pulled again, my arms screaming, and something snapped. The lock didn't break, but the bolts holding it to the doorframe gave way entirely, and the whole assembly came off in my hands. The door rolled open. Inside was darkness. The unit had no windows, no light, except what came from the corridor behind me. I turned on my phone's flashlight and stepped inside. This unit was different from A147. No shelves, no jars. Instead, the space was set up like a workshop. A table ran along one wall covered with tools. Medical instruments, I realized. Scalpels, forceps, things I didn't recognize. A large drain was built into the floor with hose connections on the wall above it. This was where they did it. Whatever it was, this was the processing room. On the table, beneath the instruments, was a notebook. I grabbed it and started photographing pages as fast as I could. Names, dates, locations, descriptions of acquisitions. Clinical, cold language describing what were clearly kidnappings. I found Rebecca Chen's name. Acquisition to 27, female, age 24. Acquired 3/14/2018 near Portland Mall Transit Station. Processing completed 3/17/2018. Sample stored A147. Remains disposed per standard protocol. There were more names, dozens of them, going back years. People who'd been taken, processed, reduced to samples in jars. Each entry listed where they'd been taken, how they'd been transported, and where their remains had been disposed of. Footsteps, right outside the unit. I looked up to see Gerald standing in the doorway. He looked at the door on the ground, at the notebook in my hands, at me. His face was red, angry, but also sad, tired. "I told you to leave it alone," he said quietly. "You knew. All this time, you knew what they were doing. I followed orders, that's all, same as you would have if you'd just done your job. My job wasn't to help them kill people. Your job was to watch cameras and walk buildings, nothing more, nothing less." He stepped into the unit. "Give me the notebook." "No. Tyler, don't make this worse than it already is. Give me the notebook and your phone. You walk away, tell the police you don't know anything about the fire, and maybe you don't go to prison for arson and breaking and entering." "What about Michael?" "Michael made his choice years ago. He should have left when we let him go. Should have moved on with his life." Gerald's hand went to his belt, and I saw he had a gun holstered there. He didn't draw it, but the threat was clear. "Last chance." "Did you know them? The people they took?" "I didn't ask. That wasn't my job." "Rebecca Chen. Did you know her name?" "I said I didn't ask." He was shouting now. I have a wife with medical bills that would bankrupt us. I have a daughter in college. I have a mortgage and car payments and a life that depends on this job. You think I wanted to know what was happening? You think I slept well at night? Then help me stop it. Turn over the evidence. Testify against them." He laughed, but it was hollow. "Testify? Kid, these people have lawyers that'll destroy any case before it gets to trial. They have money to disappear forever. And they have insurance. People who'll make sure anyone who talks doesn't talk for long. So what? You just let it continue?" "I protect my family. That's what I do. Same as most people would do if they were honest with themselves." He took another step closer. "Give me the notebook." I looked at the gun on his belt, at the door behind him, at my complete lack of options. Then I heard something that changed everything. "Police! Drop your weapon!" 2 officers appeared in the doorway behind Gerald, guns drawn. He spun around, his hand instinctively going to his gun, which was the worst possible thing he could have done. The officers shouted again, and Gerald froze, his hand hovering over his holster. "Hands up! Now!" Gerald slowly raised his hands. One of the officers moved in and disarmed him, while the other kept their weapon trained on both of us. Within seconds, Gerald was on the ground, being handcuffed, still shouting that I was the one trespassing, that I'd broken in, that he was just doing his job. "Are you Tyler Brennan?" one of the officers asked me. I nodded, still holding the notebook. "We got a 911 call about 15 minutes ago from a Michael Strauss. Said there were multiple felonies in progress at this location and gave us your name as a witness. That you?" "Yeah. Yes, I'm a witness. I have evidence." I held out the notebook. "They've been killing people, using these storage units. All the evidence is here." The police found Michael on the roof of Building B, where he'd climbed to escape Howard Vicks. Vicks was arrested trying to drive away with the white van full of containers. The second man, whose name I later learned was Dennis Kohler, was caught in the parking lot. All 3, Gerald, Vicks, and Kohler, were charged initially with assault, false imprisonment, and various fraud charges, while detectives investigated the more serious allegations. Over the next 3 weeks, the investigation expanded. The FBI got involved after finding evidence of interstate activity. Storage units at 6 other facilities owned by Northwest Holdings were searched and found to contain similar evidence. 17 additional people were arrested, including the corporate officers who owned the company and the medical professionals who'd apparently been paid to dispose of bodies and harvest organs for an illegal transplant market. The notebook I'd found in B312 became crucial evidence, detailing 42 separate kidnappings over a span of 11 years. Most of the victims were never found, their bodies disposed of through methods outlined in clinical detail in that horrible log. But the DNA samples in Unit A147 provided identification for 31 of them, finally giving families answers they'd been desperate for. Rebecca Chen's case was reopened. The evidence I'd photographed, combined with Michael's original testimony, was enough to charge Howard Vicks with murder this time. The previous legal challenges didn't apply now that everything was part of a larger federal investigation. Michael and I both faced charges initially: arson, breaking and entering, trespassing, vandalism. But as the scope of Northwest Holdings' operation became clear, prosecutors decided we'd been acting to prevent ongoing crimes. The charges were dropped in exchange for our cooperation. Michael had to do community service for starting the fire, but that was it. The trial took 2 years. I testified 3 times, walking juries through that night, showing them the photos on my phone, explaining what I'd found in those units. Gerald took a plea deal in exchange for testifying against the others. He got 7 years. Vicks and Kohler got life without parole. The corporate officers got sentences ranging from 20 to 40 years. Northwest Holdings was dissolved. The storage facilities were sold off piecemeal. I heard the one where I worked was bought by a local company and completely renovated. They tore out all the old units, rebuilt everything from scratch, tried to erase the history of what had happened there. I still have nightmares about those jars, about that notebook, about Rebecca Chen and the 41 other names I memorized during the investigation. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm back in that security office, watching those grainy camera feeds, ignoring something terrible happening right under my nose. Michael and I stayed in touch. We meet sometimes at that same diner where we planned everything, though we usually sit at different tables now, the shared trauma making friendship complicated. He found work as a private investigator, using his research skills legally now. Last I heard, he was helping families of other missing persons, trying to bring closure to cases that police had given up on. Me, I moved out of Portland. Couldn't stay in a city where I saw that facility every time I drove past it, even after it was renovated. I'm in Seattle now, working a normal day job in a normal office, and I'm grateful every single day for how boring it is. But I think about that job sometimes, about how I almost didn't open that unit, how I almost just followed orders like Gerald, like the day staff, like everyone else who decided their own comfort was more important than asking questions. How easy it would have been to just collect my paycheck and go home, pretending I didn't notice anything wrong. I think about all the people who did exactly that, and how many victims there might have been if just one person had asked questions sooner. And I think about what Michael told me in that diner right before we went back to the facility for the last time. He said, "The world depends on people ignoring things that make them uncomfortable. The moment you decide to pay attention, really pay attention, you can't ever go back to pretending you don't see." He was right. I see now. I see the things people ignore, the warning signs they dismiss, the small evils they tolerate because it's easier than confronting them. And I can't unsee it. Some nights I wish I could. Wish I was still that naive kid who took a security job just to pay rent and didn't ask any questions. But most nights, when I remember Rebecca Chen's name and the 30 other names that got justice because Michael wouldn't look away, and because I finally decided to open my eyes, I'm glad I saw. Even though it cost me my peace of mind, even though it gave me nightmares I'll probably have forever, I'm glad I didn't just follow orders. I'm glad I opened that door. If you're listening to this story and you're in a situation where you're being told not to ask questions, where something feels wrong but everyone around you acts like it's normal, please don't do what I almost did. Don't ignore it. Don't rationalize it away. Don't tell yourself it's not your problem, because somewhere, someone is counting on people like us to pay attention, to ask questions, to open the doors we're told to leave closed. And sometimes, that's the only thing standing between tragedy and justice. I still work overnight sometimes, though never security anymore. And whenever I do, I think about those 4 units: A147, B312, C209, and D156. I think about the warning someone carved into that door: don't open. They were wrong, whoever wrote that. Sometimes you have to open the door. Sometimes that's the only way to stop what's happening behind it. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope you never have to make the choice I made. But if you do, I hope you make the right one. Stay safe out there. And remember, if something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Don't wait for someone else to act. Don't assume someone else is handling it. Sometimes you're the only one who can.